So I know we're a little over time, and we're happy to have our last speaker who has agreed to be as brief and concise as possible. And if you know Shane as I do, he's my colleague here at the Yale School of Management, you know that he is extraordinary in that particular skill of conciseness. So I won't say much about him except to say that Shane is very versed in the insights about consumers that they're themselves not aware of. You should ask him over cocktails later about the combination of vinegar and beer. He was able to discover, although consumers don't think it's a good idea, they actually love it. And so that's a nice story. But without further ado, given time, here's my colleague, Shane Frederick.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks, Robbie, for inviting me to speak. I thought my challenge here was to provide a segue between the conference and the cocktails, although the last talk did that better than I possibly could. So I feel like instead I'm going to say, and also there's this. So some of you may notice a strong resemblance between the title of my talk and the title of a recent book. So I hope you regard this as sort of proselytizing rather than plagiarizing. In any case, in that book, one of the central themes that Danny Kahneman tries to kind of promote is the idea of these two different systems or modes of thought, which are kind of commonly known as intuition and reflection, or system one, system two. So intuitive thoughts are often automatic, effortless, fast, and sort of ineffable. So for example, you start having thoughts when I put these pictures up, just spontaneously, immediately. You can't really stop the thoughts. And if I ask you which of these three people is a serial killer, you know right away what the right answer is, right? You know it's the person on the right. So these three people are actually all my friends, and to my knowledge, none of them are serial killers. But if one was, of course, you know who it is. And you say, if I asked you that last but ineffable, if I asked you, why do you have that thought? You can start saying, just look at him, right? You can't really say why it is. You can distinguish that between sort of reflection or system two, which is controlled, effortful, slow, and effable. There's no real good antonym of ineffable, turns out. So for example, 17 times 24, it's controlled. You don't particularly have to start it. If I ask you to do it, you can do it. It's effortful, it takes you a while, it's slow. And you can say what you're doing. You say, like multiplication is sort of like repeated addition, 4 times 7, 8 in one's place, carry the 2, blah, blah, blah. Every single process you can tell me it's very effable. So these are two kind of very different modes of thought. Some more examples of this same person. Everybody, even those of you who don't know Ravi, can see immediately this is the same person. You can rotate the face and you see this spontaneously. Is this the same object? Yes, but it took a while, right? And you can sort of do the mental rotation very slowly. There's some sort of strong evolutionary reasons why we'd expect you to do better at the first task than the second task, right? It's really important to know whether this person is in fact Ravi and not, for example, Colin Kammerer. Whereas in the second case, we don't really have any experience with rotating these objects, right? So it's just better at some kind of task than other tasks. This is a very famous example. These two tables are surprisingly the same. So I'm going to draw a boundary around one and just rotate it into place. So most of you have the experience of the two systems kind of conflicting with one another. You have the impression that one is long and narrow and the other is short and fat, but you also have the knowledge that this thing by being rotated, I'm not sort of changing the shape of that. And it's even more powerful if you do it in a smooth progression on an overhead projector. And you have this kind of incredible experience where the two systems are kind of conflicting concurrently. Here's a problem that I've done a lot of research on. Some of you probably have the same kind of two systems interacting. There's no big reveal here anymore, I think. Most of you, though, probably have the impression, at least the first time you saw this, that the answer is 10 cents, because you can do subtraction very quickly, but then you stop and say, well, wait a second, if it was 10 cents and $1 more, that would make the bad $1.10, they would sum to $1.20. That can't be right. Wait, $1 minus 10 cents is not $1. It's 5 cents and $1.05. But it takes a while to sort of overcome your initial impression. There are a few interesting things about this problem. So it correlates with lots of stuff. It correlates with how much you pay for overnight shipping, how risk-averse you are, and lots of stuff. One of the questions that we asked this summer were the 9/11 hijackers cowards? And we just looked at the proportion saying yes as a function of their CRT score. So items like the previous one and a few others. And so most of you probably, I think, have the intuitive impression that the answer is yes, because you say, well, they're bad, and coward is a pejorative term. So there's a certain kind of matching there, bad and bad. That sounds right. But if you stop for a second, or 10, you might think, well, maybe that's really not the right adjective I would want, or term I would want to apply, concept to apply to those people who are bad in some way. And so it felt a lot to us like a kind of like a bat and ball problem, so we thought it might correlate, and it really does. The people who score high in those kinds of math problems who can override their initial impressions are also much less likely to endorse that the 9/11 hijackers are being cowards. They say, cowards? No, not cowards exactly, something else. Maybe just evil. So I thought that was sort of interesting, sort of a property of mind. There's sort of other things, too, that I think it captures sort of this problem, and one of the things I'm fascinated by it. I think it captures a lot of the properties of sort of intuitive judgment. So one of the things about intuitive judgment is that your impressions are sort of durable, and there's some cognitive momentum there. You have it, and it continues to act for a while. So Andrew and I have, before I get to that, I should say, one of the things you can do, it's kind of interesting, and with a problem like this, is you can actually separate into 4 types of people. So we give people, you can do it in a computer, you could say, what's the answer to the bat and ball problem? And then people can respond, and then if they get it wrong, you go, no, it's not 10 cents, for example, try again. And then you see what people say. And so you basically there's a no hint condition, what do they say? And then you say, hint, the answer is not 10 cents. So some people say, yeah, I know, it's 5 cents, because they got it right the first time. Some say, of course, it's not 10 cents, it's 5 cents, I get it. And some people say, you got me. I have no idea what it is. And some people say, bullshit, the answer is 10 cents. So by using this sort of within subject design, where you give people a hint which follows their initial response, you can sort of divide people into sort of 4 categories, which we've termed the reflective, the careless, the hopeless, and the diehards. And you could use other labels. Andrew preferred the term stubborn idiots, but cooler heads prevailed in that one. In any case, so you can divide people, and we're kind of comparing how these people act in various ways. But a few other things interesting, talking about sort of the durability of the response. And kind of how much momentum it has. We looked at a few other things as well. So Andrew ran this really clever study on a ferry nearby on Block Island, and he gave people 2 conditions. In one condition, he just said a bat costs $1 and a ball costs 10 cents. With those prices, does the bat cost $1 more than the ball? And people say no. Right? Most people say no, thankfully. But when you ask the question, a bat and a ball cost $1.10 total, bat costs how much does the bat cost and how much the ball cost? People give those as answers. Right? It's their answers. And then you ask the question, is your bat answer $1 more than your ball answer? And so among those, the majority who say 10 cents and $1, right? Now most people are saying yes to that question. They're my answers, right? And the question says the bat costs $1 more than the ball, so these are my answers, so the answer is yes. So the takeaway here is 35 is a lot bigger than 5. They have a certain kind of like momentum. It's something that you've thought of, and it kind of extends across time. And another thing that we did is we asked this weird question. Currently, how many U.S. senators are women? So people have some impressions about that. So there's a distribution of responses. The right answer is 20. Some people know that. Okay. It's actually a historical high, so most people give answers lower than that. We were curious about the number of the people who said 10. Specifically, 6% of people said 10. These questions. And then we asked a different weird question. We said a bat and a ball cost $1, 110 in total. The bat cost 100. Currently, how many U.S. senators are women? So now you have the answer 10 in your head, and then you receive a subsequent question for which 10 is a reasonable response, right? And so now you say 10. Okay. And so the proportion of people saying 10 increases from 6% to 36%, which is pretty incredible, I think. Anyway, so I think that illustrates a lot of sort of the kind of properties of intuitive judgments. And so I'm just going to go really quickly through some principles of judgment and some of the things that Kahneman talks about in his book. So intuitive impressions dominate judgments and choices. So here's a famous example. Linda's 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and she participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. It's not usually shown with a picture, but I just saw that picture and I said, oh my God, that's Linda. And anyway, people are given a choice between 2 options, which is more likely. Linda's a bank teller, or B, Linda's a bank teller and a feminist. Of course, she sounds like a feminist, right? So she was deeply concerned with the issues of discrimination. But if you think for a second, it can't be the case that a bank teller and feminist is more likely than the larger category bank teller. Okay, so here's a little proof of that. And there's other versions of this. Here's a version that I like, which is kind of a version of the Linda problem. How many murders are there each year in Michigan? So You probably have some impression of Michigan. I don't think it's a particularly violent impression. You probably think of football games or trout streams or farming or something. I don't know what you think of Michigan. And so then you have to map that onto some kind of response. So the average answer is 100. Other people get the question, how many murders are there each year in Detroit? Well, you know the punchline already, right, before I even put the numbers up. So it turns out the median judgment there is 200. So it's true that there actually are a large fraction of the murders that occur in Michigan do occur in Detroit, but not more than 100%. But you kind of understand why this is happening, right? Detroit, you have this impression. That impression drives your subsequent judgment. So you can all see where that occurs. So that's one. And the second principle, salient cues receive excessive weight, right? If you, in some sense, almost by definition, these are the things you focus on, and those things receive a lot of weight in your judgments and choices. So I'll just go through this really quickly. Here's another example, kind of a bat ball-like example. Suppose I loan you $100 today, and you agree to pay me back $10 at the end of each month for a year. What is the implied annual interest rate on your loan? So most people, I mean, when I say most, literally almost everybody says 20%, because they think 12 times 10 is 120, $20 extra for the loan. 20 is 20% of 100. And they think like that's kind of like credit card interest rates. But in fact, it's a lot worse than that. It's more like loan shark interest rates. Because if you think about paying that money back in a month, that would be a gigantic interest rate. And that is how you're paying some of the money back, is in a month. So the actual interest rate is about 41%. And there are loans like this, especially in low-income neighborhoods, where this is really a horrible deal. But your intuitive impressions sort of lead you astray. Okay, people sort of have that impression instead of that impression, sort of the correct one. This is one done with one of my colleagues, which I really like. How many days would it take you? They asked one group, how many days would it take you to bike from Maine to Florida on the coast? And the other group was, how many days would it take you to bike from Florida to Maine? So the second group thought it would take a lot longer because just against gravity the whole time, right? Oh my God, it's so hard. Gravity's just pulling me down the whole way. This is taking forever. This is exhausting. It turns out that gravity doesn't really work that way. Gravity pulls you towards the center of the Earth. It doesn't pull you south, okay? But that's kind of the impression that you have when you think of a map. You sort of usually oriented in that direction, and you can see where that would occur. Here's kind of an interesting one, too. I don't really know why this is. It turns out that the most salient kind of dimension when you think about volume judgment is height. And so kids, for example, you can do this stuff in front of young kids. You can pour B into C, and kids will say A and B are the same. And then you ask them, what's more, A or C? And kids will say C. You'll get a chance to laugh at them. But it turns out that this, weighting height the most and judgments of volume is something that we sort of retain into adulthood. And so Brian Wansing has done some pretty fascinating studies where he asked bartenders and others to pour a shot into either highball glass, the tall, skinny ones, test tube-like ones, or sort of a whiskey or rocks glass, which are the short, fat ones. And so people pour a lot, even experienced bartenders, unless they have a count bottle, will pour a lot more into these short glasses because they're using height as a judgment for quantity. So not very high yet, keep pouring. So bartenders, experienced bartenders, pour about 25% more. Inexperienced bartenders pour 60% more. So if you take nothing else away from this talk, ask for a short glass next time you're at the bar. So here's another example. We asked people, like, if you put a sphere inside of a cube, what fraction of the volume of the cube does the sphere occupy? And so most people overestimate. When I say most people, I mean everybody. The truth here is only 52%. Okay? And so one of the reasons is probably people are using this. They're kind of thinking it's like they have this kind of cross-section in their mind looking down on this thing. People are actually quite accurate with cross-section. So they're probably using this as a heuristic for their judgments of volume. And so you can see, in some sense, why these biases occur. So the big Kahneman diversity thing was heuristics and biases, right? Well, the bias is clear. The heuristic here is not clear, but I think here's a candidate for a heuristic for this sort of judgment. Here's one I really like. It's actually really old. It's got a really old study by Solomon Asch. It's pretty famous. It kind of illustrates how your initial impressions can often color subsequent judgments. So they had people draw into a hat, and they drew a bunch of sort of terms or adjectives about this potential employee. And they said, how much would you like to have this person working for your company? And the person was, you either pulled intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, or envious. And you had to sort of integrate, these are good and bad traits. You have to integrate that to see, kind of form a global impression of this person, how much you want them working for you. And so in this particular order, people thought this was a pretty good candidate for their position because you think intelligent, well, that's good. Industrious, good. Hardworking. Impulsive, take charge, good. We'd like that on employees. Critical, good. Attention to detail, that's a good thing. Stubborn, good. I'll stick to it. Envious, who isn't a little bit envious once in a while? And then they gave the other people, so it was constructed, they pulled it out in the opposite order. Now, these are the same 6 traits, right? In some sense, they should be sort of integrated the same way, and they were being pulled out. They weren't said these were more important. But in this case, people had a lot lower appraisal of this person. So they thought envious. Oh, it doesn't sound good. Stubborn. Oh, this person's going to be difficult. Critical. Ugh, nitpicky. I hate that. Impulsive. This guy's reckless. Industrious. Scheming. We don't want that. Intelligent. Oh my God, this guy's dangerous. Basically, right? Very, 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 very different impression. Each one sort of kind of cascading, and you're making different inferences. This is something I came across today. How smart is David Clark? So David Clark is just so-so. David F. Clark, pretty smart. David F.P. Clark, that guy's smart. David F.B.R. Clark, very, very smart, it turns out. The more initials, the more important, the more intelligent. The less athletic, by the way. He's the least athletic person. David Clark is the most. Interestingly, these are the 2 authors, actually. The first author probably got not A.P. Van Tilburg. So you can see this guy deserved first authorship, right? So that was pretty funny, I thought. Here's another one, so using cues kind of for good. So this is actually a picture of Lakeshore Drive. So one of the things is a very strong curve here, and people don't slow it down enough. Because they don't slow it enough, they crash. So one of the things that as engineers did, the city engineers, is they painted lines across the road, perpendicular to the road. So as you're crossing these lines, you're getting a cue for how fast you're going. One of the cues for speed is how many lines are going by. And so you get, besides looking at your speedometer, right, you get a sense of how fast you're going. Another very clever thing you did, if you can see it, by comparing the last 2 and the first 2, these lines got kind of imperceptibly closer and closer together. So if you're going the same speed, it gives you the impression that you're accelerating. If you're accelerating going into a curve, you slow down. That's exactly what you should be doing. And so 1 month following this, the accident rate at this corner had dropped 36%. The cost of this is about $1 probably in paint, right? So that was a pretty good deal for the city. Other really low-cost solutions I thought were clever. This is outside of Philadelphia. They put on these 2D, I guess they're called, what do you call these things? Speed bumps, 2D speed bumps. The speed on this street went from 38 miles an hour to 23 miles an hour after they painted these things on the road. Other examples of this. This is actually from an ad. I presume this would work also, though. It hasn't been tried yet. I assume it would work. This is not real, but this one is. It's outside of Kitsilano in Vancouver. So they painted this in a school zone. So this is it's actually a long painting. When you get 100 feet out, this 2D painting rises up into a 3D image of a girl on the road. And as you can imagine, it's very effective getting people to slow down. It's possible, of course, this could have backfire. You could swerve to avoid a 2D girl and crash into a car containing a 3D girl. So I don't know, but you can see at least it could be effective. So salients can be manipulated. That's one of the things. If you sort of know what salient cues are, you can manipulate these things for good or for evil. So this is something I think is sort of interesting. If you look at like life insurance deals, there's a big quantity discount. So in part because there's just a big fixed cost of holding the account. So you get a lot better deal if you buy more insurance. So here's an example. Although it's not that easy to see, and that's sort of my point of this slide. And I think that if you get a quantity discount, why do they offer quantity discounts? Often to induce customers to buy more, right? And that's probably what you want people to do, buy more of what you sell. But here, you don't even see that deal, really. I think it's hard to see just because of the layout. If I make it clear here, you can see it. If you're 35 years old, basically for twice the insurance, you want to pay about 60% more money. And just the layout is very poor, I think, for making that very salient. You compare this to a different company where it's laid out like this, it's much clearer. You see, you basically, for 2.5 times the coverage, you only pay 50% more. It's much clearer just because of the layout. I presume they induce people to buy more in this case, just because of simple things like layout. I'm going to skip this because of time. And just say some other things like, when should you expect people to make errors? Often there is no intuitive cue. Right? If you don't have anything intuitive to act on, they won't know what to do. It'll take them time. They'll make errors. Or when salient cues conflict. So here's an example. People make a lot of errors here because there's really no obvious cue as to which way this card goes. It could go 4 different ways. I don't know how it should go. There's nothing intuitive about it. Sometimes they put a little diagram there, and the diagram is often very confusing. So of course, if you're waiting for somebody at a parking garage and they're sitting there doing all this stuff, right? You see why. There's no intuitive cue for putting this thing in. And here's an example which is sad because I have a stove. Well, this is clear, right? Which is the better design? I have the stove on the left. I've melted every single piece of plastic kitchen things that I have, basically. So here it's very clear. This is this burner, this is this burner, this is this burner, this is this burner. It's almost impossible to make an error. Here, this is definitely not this, and it's not this. I don't know which of these two it is, and I've never figured it out. I've had this stove for 5 years, and I continue to make errors. I don't think I'm atypical. Here's another, actually, General Electric, which I think is bizarre. Another stove design. This isn't too bad. Left, rear, and so forth. But this is so bizarre. First of all, the temperature goes from off, and then left, warm, low, 3, and back down to 2, then up to high. I have no idea what's going on here. Very, very bad design. I don't know. Is it on? Here's another one. I think this is an elevator. Which button do I press if I want to go up? I don't know. So this is when this just happened to me. So Nathan had one of these Nike Fuel bands, and I got one too. And so I wanted to get more exercise, so I started wearing one. So I went to customize my Nike Fuel band, and this is what I saw. And I didn't know what the default was. I mean, I didn't know whether left or right was the default, and I didn't know whether light gray or dark gray was like the one that had been default selected. So I didn't know when I clicked, they reversed, but I didn't know whether I just selected or whether I deselected. Right? And I never could figure this out. I didn't know if I should hit next or click, and I sat there for a very long time. I almost abandoned it, but eventually I got through it. I still don't know which one it is, but you can see the problem here. This is actually one from our school. So here's a tea. They put tea in these things, and so there are two possible interpretations. This is hibiscus tea. So it could be that this is sort of meant to mirror the layout of the box. So in that case, hibiscus is here. Or it could be that when you close the box, this lies above the thing for which it's a flavor, in which case it's here. Any guesses? The answer is B. I don't know why. So people didn't know which tea they were drinking, and they had to do all this sampling. This is kind of a funny one from the original food. This used to be a food pyramid. Now it's a food plate. But you think, like, so at the top of the pyramid, okay, that's what I really need. Fats, oils, and sweets, right? Right at the very top of the pyramid. This is used sparingly, right? But obviously there's a conflicting cues here. This is one, kind of some people, a sad one. George Bush, no. Al Gore, second one down, yeah. Except that, oh no, I'm actually casting a ballot for Pat Buchanan. Siphoned away tens of thousands of votes from Al Gore in Palm Beach County. I just hear that all in the crowd. Anyway, you know the end of that story. So principles, judgment. So performance can be improved if you provide salient cues regarding progress towards a goal, or if you just design products that sort of either anticipate or sort of just negate the user error. So here's a really great product. So Glidden makes this paint called Magic White. So it paints on pink, and in about 8 hours it dries white. So it's hard otherwise, have I missed a spot or not if you're using normal paint. Here it's really easy. If it's not pink, keep painting, right? It's a very simple cue and goal towards the solution. Here's another one nice. It's actually made by a firm in Massachusetts called the Ambient Orb. So this just kind of gives you a kind of a visual summary of how much electricity you're using. Otherwise, it's very hard. It starts glowing redder as you use more electricity. So otherwise, I don't really know. I have to go outside in the rain, and I've watched this thing revolve, and then kind of compare that to the velocity it revolved the last time I looked up. I have no idea, right, how much electricity I'm using. This way, I get immediate feedback. The thing changes color. I look at it. I know how much I'm using. I unplug stuff. But they also make a power-aware cord, which is the same thing, basically. This one is nice. Actually, it tells you how much you're talking relative to others in the conversation. It's called a reflect table. It's probably pretty useful, especially for men on first dates. So I guess basically I was saying a part of this is like design away the user error. Why not just make the thing, going back to this one, just make the thing so put 4 magnetic readers in all 4 corners. It doesn't make any damn difference which way you stick it in. Right? Like that would be really the right way to solve this. And so I gave a talk in Florida a while back on sort of product safety, and one of the things I was kind of compelled by was this example. So this is on a GM car. This is on the back probably of a very thick user manual. It says, leaving children in a vehicle with ignition is dangerous for many reasons. A child or others could be badly injured or killed. They could I get it, right? Like probably everybody knows that it's not good to leave kids in cars, but probably some people are still going to do it. It's not clear exactly what will happen here. They could operate the power windows or the controls, but it doesn't really tell you what actually could really happen in a very clear way. But here's actually what does happen. So kids are left in cars. You don't intend to, but you do. And then, of course, what do kids do, when they're in cars? They're bored, right? So they start to peer out the window. So kids, if they can unlock themselves, they peer out the window. Well, kids are little, right? So they kneel basically on the controls on the edge of the doors. And so what do those controls do? Well, some of the controls basically operate power windows. So the windows come up and they basically asphyxiate the kids because they're peering out and they get caught, and pretty soon you can't scream. It doesn't actually take much force to strangle a kid. And so it turns out that, so here's from a legal proceedings, what happens. Like, this really should be what's shown, right? Like, this is what could happen if you leave your kid in the car. This is obviously a lot easier to see. It turns out there's two kinds of switches on these when you kneel down. There's sort of rocker switches, which is basically up, down, toggle left, right. Or there are lever switches, which up is up and down is down. And so you can ask the question, which is a better design? Or you could ask the question, how many deaths have there been? It turns out there's been 42 deaths from rocker switches and 0 from lever switches, because if you kneel down the lever switch, it goes down, right? It's not going to basically strangle you. So it's obviously a better design. So the last principle judgment is just, so this is a big part of what I'm really interested in. I think a lot of people here are, and Kahneman has and talks about in his book a lot, sort of framing effects. And that's sort of logical equivalent. Logical equivalent frames are not psychologically equivalent, right? This hamburger is 15% fat. It's not the same as saying it's 85% lean. You can just feel that, right? One kind of calls attention to the good properties, and the other calls attention to the bad properties. And so you have different impressions, different judgments. They taste differently. You pay different amounts and so forth for these under the two different frames. This one I thought was interesting because, I already know the calorie information is listed. And I know in some sense that 0 is a lot less than some other higher number, right? But this is just so much more dramatic. This is in teaspoons of sugar in this drink. And 0 is like lower here. It's just so much to see no sugar there and to see how much sugar these other things contain in terms of teaspoons. This is just visually a lot more impressive than sort of my cognitive knowledge that these things have 0, that water has 0 calories. This one I thought is pretty dramatic, obviously. So I'll blow up. This is from a New Zealand thing, but it says tobacco-related deaths since 2000. Oh, sorry, terrorism-related deaths since 2001, 11,317. Tobacco-related deaths, 30 million. This is obviously a pretty potent image. This is one of my students had worked on for the Hartford, so financial products. It just blew it up for you. A 65-year-old has a 25% chance of living to 92. And I said, did you try other frames? I don't know if it's a bad frame, by the way, but you can see there's lots of other ways you could describe this. It's not clear that this is necessarily the one that will most compel you to invest, and presumably invest with the Hartford. You could say, a 65-year-old has a 25% chance of living 27 more years. You could say a 65-year-old has a 3% chance of living to 100 or whatever, right? You get a million different things you could have tried, and you could compare which one is most effective. Kind of a classic example of where you could bring framing effects to bear on business. Michelin, I thought, was genius. I just don't think prior to this ad you really thought about tires as being pertaining to your child's safety. But Michelin, because so much is riding on your tires. And of course, once you construe it that way, how price sensitive are you going to be? When you're thinking about your kid, life is at stake. This was interesting. Elm Grove, Wisconsin. They tried to basically reframe what going too fast will mean. So 46 days. So this is, I think, dynamic, right? You go by and some number flashes up. And instead of giving you speed, it says 46 days in the hospital bed if you crash at this speed. 30% chance of crash at this speed, or $42,000 accident bills if you crash at this speed. So that was a pretty neat thing, I thought. So I promised to provide a little bit of a segue to the cocktails, so it was only 2 more slides. I thought was really interesting. I never thought before to compare the nutritional facts of content of beer and milk, and I'm very happy to report that beer is better. Less fat, some fiber, less sodium, no cholesterol, fewer calories, no calories from fat. Okay, so that is some pretty happy news. And the last one I'll leave you with, I just found this today. These are actually the tweets of whether you drink wine. Are you more likely to tweet about wine, or more likely to tweet about beer? More roughly equally likely to tweet about wine or beer, or there's not enough data to determine. So a few things interesting. So I was surprised that Florida has more wine than beer. I was not surprised that where I grew up, Wisconsin, is more beer. Florida's more wine. And in sort of the mountain time zone, there's really not enough data. So it's either the case that they don't drink, they don't have Twitter accounts, or they don't tweet about what they drink. I'm not sure which is the case. But anyway, thanks for your time.
So thank you, everyone, for coming today. My job right now is just to let you know, those of you who are taking the shuttle, the bus is out front. For those of you driving to the restaurant, there's a parking structure next to the restaurant, and we'll have vouchers for the parking.
Yeah, you got it.